at any time. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to consider a single measure, H.R. 4, the Rescissions Act of 2025. As the Speaker indicated early last week, the People's House is acting quickly upon the White House's request to terminate $9.4 billion in wasteful spending at the State Department, USAID, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and within other entities. Let's be clear about the context and precedence of what's going on here. Congress set up a process for enacting rescissions of funds in the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, more than 50 years ago. We're following that thoughtfully deliberated process. President Trump and congressional Republicans campaigned on attacking wasteful spending. The public then gave us a mandate in November. So the new administration, which came into power in the middle of the fiscal year, then found wasteful spending. President Trump then acted and recommended that these funds be permanently canceled. I cannot think of a more textbook scenario of the proper utilization of this process. A new president with a new agenda decides to inform Congress that he wants to save the dollars of hardworking taxpayers. That's really the whole story here. Nothing more to explain. It's not rocket science. What also is clear is the mandate that voters gave this Republican majority, a mandate to act precisely upon the commitments we made. This rescissions package reflects, hopefully, only one step of the good work that the Trump administration has done to root out waste, fraud, and abuse across all corners of the federal government. The administration will need to remain vigilant in ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent in both appropriate and thoughtful ways. The efforts of the staff of DOGE, OMB, and the rest of President Trump's watchdogs have been Herculean, and I'm particularly pleased to see all the progress that has been made. This is an exercise in restoring fiscal sanity that was torched by the Biden-Harris administration. Republicans have our attention affixed to eliminating the rot of wasteful programs that have been allowed to fester for entirely too long. In contrast, our Democrat colleagues simply cannot prove to the American people that they're in favor of eliminating a single federal program, outlay, or tranche of taxpayer money otherwise. It's not in their DNA. Whether it's the $1.6 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse cut in H.R. 1, or this humbler nearly $10 billion in discretionary waste before us, House Republicans are serious about going after every morsel of wasted taxpayer money. It's the people's money. A single dollar wasted is one too many in our view. Let's take a quick minute or so to preview the waste that's going on here, although I will not spend an exorbitant amount of time because it will inevitably be covered during our debate here today. With respect to foreign aid, $14 million in cash vouchers for migrants at our southern border, $24,000 for a national spelling bee in Bosnia, $1.5 million to mobilize elderly, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, and intersex people to be involved in the Costa Rica political process, $20,000 for a drag show in Ecuador, and $32,000 for an LGBTQ comic book in Peru. And then there's NPR. I honestly don't even know where to begin on that one. Even if someone were to accept the premise that we need to finance a public radio outlet, certainly we can all agree that it simply cannot be NPR any longer. NPR's own CEO testified before Congress that she's never seen any political bias at NPR. I don't know what reality she's living in, but it certainly isn't this one. Here's the kicker. NPR does harbor political bias. It took a $1.9 million grant to, quote, improve objectivity and diverse viewpoints, end quote. There's the proof, and it's a concrete example that NPR's CEO was giving false testimony to Congress. You either understand that you're biased and need help, apparently in the form of taxpayer grants, or you haven't witnessed any bias. You can't have it both ways. Then there's PBS. Again, I honestly don't know where to begin. On top of the concrete, statistically proven bias against conservatives, Republicans, and the Trump administration, this is the 21st century. We have Sesame Street now streaming on private services, so the taxpayer is now subsidizing for-profit companies. We've seen private celebrities like Miss Rachel, who are engaged in crossovers with Sesame Street, which again leverages taxpayer dollars to concentrate wealth to private individuals. As I've said before, I'm rather certain we will visit a lot of this wasteful spending in our discussion. What's important is that the American people know that wasteful spending goes on in Washington. Just ask them about their thoughts on it. Seriously, just ask them. Ultimately, this is really a question of what Congress will do about it. We cut $1.6 trillion just weeks ago, and I'm thrilled we'll be cutting nearly $10 billion in waste today. We remain on a positive trajectory, having passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, now taking up this rescission package, and soon moving into the appropriations process. Our work continues without delay. Again, I'd like to thank the Trump administration for its leadership on this rescission package. With that, I yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So let's just say the quiet part out loud. This rescissions package is based on a scam, a con job, a grift. DOGE was never about good governance. It was never about efficiency. It was about giving Trump's ex-best friend, Elon Musk, a taxpayer-funded slush fund. He and Elon might be on the rocks, but this has always been about one thing and one thing only: rewarding Trump's donors. This bill is a perfect example of why people hate Washington. We hear all these promises about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, and then you open up the hood and you look at what this bill is cutting. And it's not waste or fraud or abuse. It's cutting essential services that people rely on, cutting programs that save lives. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this stuff out. The USDA had to rehire all the bird flu experts after DOGE fired them in the middle of the bird flu. The Department of Energy had to undo its own cuts after DOGE sent termination notices to the people who secure America's nuclear warheads. The National Weather Service is rehiring people after DOGE went in and gutted that agency. Now we hear we might not have enough meteorologists on hand to warn people of tornadoes and other severe storms. DOGE was a disaster, and we all know it. And now we're going to start to codifying their absurd, stupid cuts into law, starting with USAID and public broadcasting. Really? This is insane. And look at what the Republicans are not cutting. Look at what they won't dare to touch. These guys say we need to tighten our belts, and I'm all for it. But where is the rescissions package for the Pentagon? What about going after the defense contractors that charge us $10,000 for a toilet seat cover? The Pentagon has never passed an audit, never. They spend nearly $1 trillion a year, and instead of looking at the agency that spends $10,000 on a toilet, Republicans want to go after Sesame Street. I mean, what the hell is wrong with this place? Let's get our fiscal house in order. Democrats are on board. Let's claw back the billions in wasteful big oil subsidies. Let's look into ending massive tax loopholes and giveaways Republicans continue handing out to millionaires and billionaires. But please, please, let's not pretend this bill is about saving money when these cuts represent a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of savings compared to the federal budget. Let's not pretend like what we're doing here today is anything other than a corrupt con job designed to make people think Republicans are saving money so they can justify their tax cuts for billionaires. You guys are going after UNICEF and Sesame Street instead of going after the billionaires and big banks that pay zero in taxes. This is insane. You're gutting PEPFAR, an overwhelmingly bipartisan program created by President George W. Bush to combat the global HIV crisis. Cutting this program by $400 million is going to kill people, full stop. Follow the money, America. Look at who the Republicans refuse to go toe-to-toe with. It's the people who write them the big, fat campaign checks, the billionaires, the big oil lobbyists. And at a time when authoritarian powers are challenging us on every continent, when the world is practically begging for us to lead, this package says, sorry, we can't fund diplomacy. We can't support global public health. We can't try to prevent war and conflict. We can't save lives because it might offend some billionaire who came up with these ideas while he was high on ketamine. This is literally nuts. America knows it, and Republicans know it. What's disgraceful is so many of them are willing to go along to get along. America is better than this. We ought to lead with strength, not stupidity. Let's look for smart ways to cut government funding. Let's come together and find strategic ways to reduce spending, to cut back on waste, to go after fraud. But let's not pretend that that's what this bill does. This is a scam, it's a con job, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on this insane, disgraceful DOGE disaster, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our panel, Representative Adderholt and Ranking Member DeLauro from the Committee on Appropriations. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Adderholt, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, and let me say to you and to Ranking Member McGovern and the members of the Rules Committee on both sides of the aisle, thank you for the opportunity to testify today as we look at proposed rescinding certain proposals that they have been sent down from the President to Congress. The rescission package before the committee today is an important step toward greater fiscal responsibility and prudent realignment of our spending priorities in foreign assistance as well as domestic broadcasting. You all know that this bill would rescind budget authority for $9.4 billion, including funding for United Nations, climate change programs, refugee assistance, economic and development assistance, and Corporation for Public Broadcasting. These rescissions are proposed with the taxpayer in mind. The proposal claws back funds to reduce duplicative efforts, streamline our foreign policy goals, and require that our partners around the world contribute more fairly to our shared priorities. American taxpayers are not the only beneficiaries of this effort. Changing our foreign policy mission from a handout to a hand-up will be a welcome news to our global partners. This package would protect the life-saving mission within the global health programs, but it would discard the DEI boondoggles that neither the American taxpayer nor 700 million people around the globe who live under the extreme poverty line have any desire for. Every dollar spent on woke foreign policy is not only a dollar wasted, but is a dollar devoted to tarnish our own nation's image. And I have spoken to lawmakers around the world, and they totally agree. Not least is where the eyes, the very people they intend to help. For instance, let me give you an example. The State Department spends over $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. By doing that, we mock both the American taxpayer and the 18 million people in that country who live below the profound poverty line. It is wasteful, it is counterproductive, and it ends with this package. Throughout the rescission proposal, the administration outlines their commitment to refocusing programs to their core functions, which include life-saving work, protection of U.S. national security, advancement of American values, and most important, making it a priority for return on investments to the American taxpayer. I commend President Trump for his unwavering adherence to his America First values, and I would urge my colleagues to take up consideration of this bill to ensure that Congress does the same. Thanks for holding the hearing, and I look forward to answering any questions that I could, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. Congresswoman DeLauro, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern and members of the committee. I am opposed to this bill to aid and abet billionaires in stealing from the American people, and which does nothing to help the American people with the cost of living. Since taking office, the Trump administration has unlawfully stolen funds appropriated by the Congress, passed by Republicans and Democrats in the House and in the Senate, signed into law by the president, upending the separation of powers in our constitutional order. For what ends? To hand billionaires and the biggest corporations who already pay little or no taxes another massive tax break. To make our government so broken, so dysfunctional, so starved for resources, so full of incompetent political lackeys and bereft of experts and professionals that its departments and agencies cannot feasibly achieve the goals and the missions to which they were lawfully directed. And ultimately to embrace privatization, to give the biggest companies unchecked power to rig the economy against the middle class, working and vulnerable families, and to ensure the American people have no faith in the ability of government to do good in their lives. My colleagues, there is no inherent authority for the president to impound, and there has never been. For the record, the myth of presidential impoundment power going back to 1789, which demonstrates that the president, it's the Congress that provides the power to delay funds or to say no to funds. It is not the president of the United States, nor the OMB director, nor an Elon Musk. The late Justice Scalia and Rehnquist said so. Chief Justice Robert and Justice Kavanaugh have said so, and they are no liberal torchbearers. The Department of Justice and Government Accountability have said so. Alexander Hamilton, where the purse is lodged in one branch and the sword in another, there can be no danger. Over 200 years of American history say no. This rescissions package, dated May 28th, submitted June 3rd, 134 days after the president began unlawfully freezing across all the government, freezing funding, is an admission by President Trump and Russ Vought that they have been breaking the law by impounding $425 billion in appropriated funding across the government. But they do not care about the consequences for Americans or stealing the people's money. A quick note. Russ Vought believes, and others here believe, that the Impoundment Control Act is unconstitutional. But now they want to exploit it for their own gains. They're using they're using a mechanism that is outlined in the law to be able to present a rescissions package. And the original position is they have broken the law. Now what they want to do is to use the mechanism in the Impoundment Control Act to CYA. That's what they're doing, and they don't believe that the Impoundment Control Act is constitutional, but they're moving forward with this madness here. This is a bill to codify the right of billionaires to steal from rural and vulnerable American communities, children, and the global poor for the sake of handing even more money to billionaires. Congress needs to fight for the middle class, the working class, and the vulnerable, not to protect the interests of billionaires and big corporations. This is a bill to shut down rural television and radio stations, cutting off coverage of local news, eliminating emergency information like severe weather alerts, jeopardizing access to PBS Kids children's programming like Sesame Street and Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. This does not create efficiency, nor does it help the American people. This bill is to rip life-saving support away from hungry, displaced, and sick people in developing countries and conflict zones across the globe, to end programs that treat deadly diseases and prevent pandemics. Ripping life-saving aid away from current allies does not further our national interests. This is a bill to abandon the people of Ukraine while they resist Putin's tyranny. This is a bill to cut $400 million from PEPFAR, a paragon of American leadership that has saved 26 million lives, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. Instead of facing a death sentence, people supported by PEPFAR are raising families, building their communities, and helping their communities grow and develop. This is a bill that puts America last. When we retreat from the world diplomatically and through our assistance to vulnerable people, America will be alone, without allies, in a less stable world, without the support of the international community. And do you know who will come out ahead? China, Russia, Iran. When people in need see bags of food and flour coming through that say USA, that shows the power of the United States. That will be traded for food aid from China. We are here today considering cuts after months of unlawful impoundment that will conceal a Republican reconciliation bill to make the billionaires in America even more rich, increase the debt by $3 trillion, rip health insurance away from at least 16 million Americans. This bill rescinds $9.4 billion, which Congress just appropriated not even 3 months ago. And now the president is asking Congress to rubber stamp its proposal to steal from the American people without concern for the consequences. This bill does nothing to help the American people with the cost of living. I strongly oppose this bill, which forfeits our global leadership, undermines our national security, and steals from the American people to hand more wealth to billionaires. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman DeLauro. Congressman Adderholt, President Trump came into office in the middle of a fiscal year, which was appropriated before he came into the office. Do you agree that this is a textbook use of the Impound Control Act, that when a president comes into office, finds wasteful spending from the previous administration and Congress, and decides that it should be rescinded?
Yes, I think it is a textbook example and of use of the Impound Act, and I fully support the president's request to restore our integrity for our foreign obligations, and I totally support everything that the president's doing. You read some of the examples that we saw that is in this bill that has been done in the past administration that is absolutely ludicrous. And this would address those very issues that I think most Americans would find appalling, but so many of them don't even know about it. This goes ahead and addresses the issue and deals with it so that we can use the money for the right purposes that it's in line with the president's mandate.
And isn't it true that we've effectively been on Democrat levels of spending for years now, given that the Democrats control the Senate and presidency last Congress?
Yes, as you know, we've done through the continuing resolution, and we've moved forward on that back earlier this year, and so that's why this is needed here today.
And isn't it true that when Democrats had full control of the levers of power, they expanded the federal government with an unprecedented $11 trillion in spending, $6 trillion of which has been added to the national debt?
Yes, you are correct.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. McGovern.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member DeLauro, I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a second, make believe I'm a Republican. So I'm going to ask this question. How can we afford to send money overseas when we have needs at home? Make sure your mic's on, yeah.
I appreciate that. If you just indulge me for a moment, I think I've got to dispel this myth that people are under. Chief Justice Rehnquist, with respect to the suggestion that the president has a constitutional power to decline to spend appropriated funds, we must conclude that existence of such broad power is supported neither by reason nor precedent. Disabuse yourself of this notion that this president or any president, Republican, Democrat, does not have the power to impound. I will get to your question now. Listen, we spend less than 1/2 of 1% of gross national product on overseas assistance. Current spending is 50% less in real terms spent on diplomacy and development than during the Cold War. 1 out of every 4 countries have populations that face severe hunger, exacerbating conflict, instability in hotspots around the world, and directly impacts the U.S. national and economic security. What is the PRC doing? My colleagues are in fear of the People's Republic of China, has increased development spending and financing by over 430% over the last 10 years. And that's of available data. China is surpassing the U.S. as the largest trading partner in many countries in Latin America and Africa. China has more embassies and consulates, diplomats, and foreign assistants than anyone else in the world. They challenge us, democracy and capitalism around the world, going virtually unchallenged. Let me just also say, I want to just say, they talk about waste, fraud, and abuse in these programs. Let's take a look at what we're talking about in the programs, because I think it's really critically important to note what we are really talking about here. You got maternal and child health.
It doesn't sound like a woke program to
Is
me,
that a
or a
woke
government
program?
waste, yeah.
Maternal and child health? Hell, okay. You know, let's get rid of it all. Let's not worry about maternal morbidity or mortality. Development activities, water and sanitation. Let's talk about PEPFAR. 26 million people. 26 million people on life-saving antiretroviral treatment. 2.3 million adolescent girls and young women reached with comprehensive HIV prevention services. 6.6 million orphans, vulnerable children, and their caregivers received critical care and support. 2.5 million people newly enrolled on PrEP to prevent HIV infection. 83.8 million people provided with HIV testing services, and 342,000 health workers directly supported by PEPFAR. You got humanitarian needs, you got education needs. You know, I'm not sure people even know what they're making reference to in terms of woke. These are the programs that are part of what is being rescinded illegally. It was illegally stolen, and now we're coming around to rubber stamp to say it's okay.
Mr. Aderholt, speaking of PEPFAR, this rescissions package cuts $400 million from PEPFAR, which is an overwhelmingly bipartisan program created by President George W. Bush to combat the global HIV crisis. This program alone has saved, as Mr. Laurel pointed out, has saved 26 million people from dying of HIV and enabled more than 8 million babies to be born HIV-free. There are now tens of millions of people on life-saving treatment, with PEPFAR accounting for over 90% of preventative, treatments around the world. Your bill pulls the rug from under this program and kneecaps 20 years of bipartisan progress. Don't you agree, Mr. Aderholt, that eliminating HIV as a public health threat is an important goal that the U.S. should continue to pursue?
Well, as you know, this proposal that's been presented here to Congress, and let me just say, this is the president's proposal, and Congress has the ability to vote it up or down. But a lot of there is a lot of this money.
Excuse me, we're not going to have a separate vote on this. We're going to have to vote for this rescissions package.
Oh,
all
right.
or nothing.
But like I said, it will be, Congress will be allowed to vote on it. This is something the president just proposing. But the rescissions package proposes to rescind $500 million from this account, but that's roughly only 12% of the funding.
Well, let me just ask you, I just asked you, I mean, do you think that, the question was, do you think that eliminating HIV as a public health threat is an important goal that the U.S. should continue to pursue?
It is, but there are a lot of things that's included in these programs that go beyond that. The equity programs, the LGBTQI plus.
We're talking about PEPFAR, right?
Well, a lot of these are being misspent. And,
PEPFAR is being misspent. Let me say, some Republicans have rightly expressed concern over these cuts, but I wonder if those who express concerns are going to do anything about it. For example, one Republican congressman from Florida said that PEPFAR, quote, saved a generation, end quote. And in 2023, President Bush wrote an op-ed that there is no program more pro-life than the one that has saved more than 25 million lives. Do you agree with President Bush that a program that has saved now more than 26 million lives is pro-life?
Again, this is not completely cutting out this program.
You are decimating this program. A $400 million cut is huge. The idea that, it's kind of like the discussion we had today on the floor about a $300 million cut from SNAP. Don't worry, nothing's going to be impacted. I don't know of a single person associated with combating HIV/AIDS around the world who doesn't say, including some of the founders of PEPFAR, who worked with the Bush administration, that this will have a devastating impact. And are you basically saying we can all work around this and there'll be no there'll be no impact?
I think my understanding of what the president was requesting to restore the integrity of these programs and trying to get out the waste, fraud, and abuse
Well,
that
yeah,
we've
but
seen in it, and
Well, I haven't seen the administration statement of the waste, fraud, and abuse in PEPFAR. Look, since taking office, President Trump has illegally, as Mr. Laurel pointed out, attempted to dismantle USAID, which has threatened the lives of millions of people who rely on this funding to prevent or treat diseases, afford food, and get access to clean water. Do you know how many deaths have been caused by Trump's decision to discontinue funding for USAID?
I'm assuming you tell me.
Yeah, well, according to Boston University School of Public Health, which is tracking the impact of these cuts, over 106,000 adults and over 200,000 children have already died due to the illegal termination of these programs. Do you know how many have died of HIV due to the disruption of PEPFAR already? More than 50,000 adults and 6,000 infants. Do you know how many children have died of malaria? More than 29,000. Do you know how many people have died of tuberculosis as a result of these cuts? More than 25,000. I mean, global health programs, I hate to, burst the bubble of my Republican friends over here. I mean, global health programs are not some woke initiative. These are a good investment. I mean, this rescission would eliminate public health, security, global cooperation, and America's reputation as a principled and effective leader. Ranking Member DeLauro, isn't it true that poorly controlled outbreaks can have severe economic and social consequences? Like, what happens if the U.S. no longer has staff embedded within other countries and we're not notified that a disease needs to be addressed? Won't that increase the likelihood of that disease coming to our districts, the United States?
That's precisely right. These illnesses don't know borders. If we are not on the ground doing what we need to do in global health, then we are at risk. We are gravely at risk, whether it is a pandemic, whether it is Zika, whether it is Ebola or anything else. If we do not have people on the ground, if we do not have the CDC people who are there or others who are there who can really translate for us what is happening and deal with prevention, these diseases cross borders. They don't say, okay, stop, I'm not going to the United States today. It is so foolish what is being done to not only isolate the United States, but put us health-wise in great jeopardy. And there's no rationale for it, to take away these opportunities for us to
Right.
safeguard the health security of the United States. If you can't think about others or whether they're going to live or die, think about the health security of the people in the United States.
Yeah, and let's be forthcoming here. That the administration has already withheld money from a lot of these programs. That's why people are already dying as a result of these cutbacks. Let me just.
Food and humanitarian assistance rampant.
Let me just add, maybe do a little math here, Mr. Adderhold. Under the Republican tax scam, CBO says the deficit will increase by $3 trillion. How much bigger is $3 trillion in tax cuts than the $9.4 billion that you're rescinding in this bill? It's 320 times bigger. To kind of put what we're doing here in perspective. And under the Republican tax scam, CBO says the top 5% of earners will get a $1.6 trillion tax cut. How much bigger is the $1.6 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthy than the $9.4 billion that Republicans are rescinding in this bill? 170 times bigger. Look, it is clear that this rescissions package is a moral failure masquerading as fiscal responsibility. These so-called savings are a drop in the bucket compared to their giveaways for the wealthiest among us. It's a drop in the ocean. And at what human cost? PEPFAR is not a woke program. I mean, it is one of the most successful programs that has ever been created to combat, a public health emergency. And before the rescissions in this bill, the FY25 funds were already $10 billion below the total humanitarian resources in the prior year. And this rescission would pull back $1.3 billion in funding to the most vulnerable people in the world, malnourished children, refugees, people fleeing violence. You know, the historic level of humanitarian need flies in the face of this rescission. By mid-2024, nearly 123 million people had been forcibly displaced by conflict and violence, marking the 12th consecutive annual increase. And the United States is helping to support displaced populations from Afghanistan, Burma, Ethiopia, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, Yemen, and elsewhere. Ranking Member DeLauro, how can the administration make the argument that these funds are not needed? And in particular, how would the rescission package affect Ukraine?
Well, first of all, let me just say the one thing you mentioned, support through programs like Gavi that have vaccinated more than 1.1 billion children and prevented more than 18.8 million future deaths. You talked about malnutrition. Costs the world $3.5 trillion in lost productivity and healthcare costs each year. According to UNICEF, at least 14 million children are now expected to face disruptions to nutrition from the cuts already made by donors. Tell me, Ukraine is to walk away from the assistance for Ukraine. Ukraine is that flagship that says we will hold democracy sacrosanct in our world. Ukraine. And to fritter around, and whether it is the kind of social service help that we provided, security assistance that we provided, if we are not providing that, then we should stand back and say, go ahead, Mr. Putin, take it all, take it on.
I mean, we're supposed to be a leader in the world, and being a leader in the world has to mean more than just sending bombs to every country in the world.
What is it that they use? It says
Right.
everything is
Let me
brutality.
just close with this one thing. So today on the House floor, you know, Ms. Houchin and I got into a debate over the reconciliation package. And she went through a list of all the reasons why the big, ugly bill was such a good thing for us to pass, and bragging about all the things that were in the bill, including the fact that the bill removes the tax on gun silencers that has been on the book for a century. And according to the Independent Joint Committee on Taxation, ending the tax on gun silencers costs $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion. That's more than the $1.1 billion Republicans are, quote, saving by eliminating all funding for public TV and radio. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a discussion about values and morals, you know, and what is important. Mr. Aderholt, I don't know, how can you justify eliminating funding for public TV and radio, which millions of Americans rely on, particularly in rural areas where people have no other source of local news, when Republicans are taking these savings to give a big tax cut for gun silencers? I mean, how you know, or how do you justify any of these cuts to programs that feed kids or combat disease? I mean, if we're trying to save money, I mean, how, you know, removing the tax on gun silencers, like, why is that more important than funding some of the programs that we're here talking about?
I think the bottom line is, you know, I think we've got to remember, America has invested, I think we agree, has saved a lot of lives
Yes.
in the past.
Yes.
But where we would disagree, by this rescission package, it's not going to stop that. We will continue to do that, and I think anybody who's concerned about some of this stuff with,
Mr. Aderholt,
with the foreign policy, you should
Mr.
support
Aderholt,
this.
it already, funding for many of these programs has already stopped. So we are seeing the effects of this right now. And again, I just find it, just stunning that you guys don't have a problem with removing the tax on gun silencers, but somehow you want to, which is at $1.5 billion, but somehow you want to cut, money for public TV and radio or PEPFAR or other humanitarian programs. I don't know. I mean, did the Assassins Lobby ask for the repeal on, on the tax on gun silencers? I just find this so fundamentally wrong that, this Congress passed a bill to remove the tax on gun silencers, and says that we have to cut money to combat HIV/AIDS because we got to find savings. I think that's a moral failing, and I'll yield to Mr. Lauro for his last word.
I would just say to you, you asked about Ukraine, but is the elimination of all of the civilian funding intended to support Ukraine and other partners in Eastern Europe and Central Asia who are all facing aggression from Putin. You can't say at the one side, we've got to, stop Russia, stop Putin, and then open the door for Putin to come in and to take over in these places. I think just as a final point here, I have to go back. This debate, we shouldn't be having this debate because there is no legal basis for stealing congressionally directed taxpayer funds. That has been established in law and in our Constitution. And now they're trying to find a way to rubber stamp Elon Musk's destruction, if you will, the road to destruction, what they have done. And you cherry pick out of the Empowerment Control Act the provision which says is where you should have started of looking at how we might deal with looking at rescinding money with the 45-day limit. And you want to cherry pick that and then say, okay, that's what we're doing, and we're going to codify these. It is really unconscionable as to the havoc that is being wrought on both in terms of impoundment and dismantling the federal government. And that's what President Trump, Russ Vought, and Elon Musk are all about. And my Republican colleagues will rubber stamp that effort.
And Mr. Erdahl, did you want to respond?
Well, let me just say, we've talked a lot about the PEPFAR, and I know that's been an issue but with this rescissions of, I think it's around a little more than $8 billion that's been rescinded, total funding for diplomacy and foreign assistance is still $51 billion. So it's, I don't think we should get the picture that there's going to be like $100.
Because of what has already been withheld, I went through a list of the number of deaths that have already occurred, all right? And that is just going to get worse with this additional cut. And I'll just close with this. I have always believed America's greatness is in our humanity. And I think what we see here is that my Republican friends somehow think our greatness is in our inhumanity. I can't believe we're doing this. I cannot believe we're doing this. And by the way, this is the tip of the iceberg. Wait till we get to some of the other programs that are being unilaterally halted right now, like the McGovern-Dole school feeding program, feeding poor kids in school settings, one of the most successful anti-hunger programs we have. But in any event, I don't want to belabor this point.
Well, Mr. Vought said that this is the first of a rescission package.
Yeah, no, I know.
And this is a test.
Right.
And then they're going to come back with more rescissions,
I
which is in violation, and people need to understand that.
I thank you both. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Ms. Fishbach, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I would just like to say, Mr. Adderholt, if you would like, if there's anything you want to respond to, I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
Well, let me just say that, the waste, fraud, and abuse is what this is all about. And, I mean, we're hearing examples from the other side that I think are totally been taken out of context. America has saved lives across the world. We all agree with that, and we will continue to do that. I think if anyone that's concerned about the future of U.S. foreign policy in this country should support this, because rescinding these counterproductive funds will help restore the integrity that we have had as a nation in our images abroad. And I can tell you, it is these polarizing policies, and including the DEI, that have undermined our image around the world. Like I said, I have talked to members of parliament around the world, and they are very concerned about what was happening in the last administration, and this administration wants to go down another path, and I totally agree that we need to go down another path.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to add that this is what government's supposed to do. You know, the word stolen and stealing was used, but government is supposed to be looking at programs, is supposed to be looking at how we are spending taxpayer dollars. As elected officials, this is our job. This is our responsibility to look at programs, to make cuts where necessary, and to be responsible with the taxpayers' dollars. And Mr. Adderhold, you had mentioned then, and I think it bears repeating, that we're only taking a portion. In some of these cases, it's as low as 12%, but none of these programs are not being zeroed out. And I just wanted to take a minute to read a couple of things. This is from the White House on the proposed rescission of budget authority. And this is, it says that this proposal would not reduce treatment, but would eliminate programs that are antithetical to American interests and worsen the lives of women and children. So they say very clearly that it would not reduce treatment, and this is the one regarding the HIV/AIDS money. You know, enacting the rescission would reinstate focus on appropriate health and life spending. We look at another one where they're talking here, which is another, it's a 12, just approximately a 12% cut. We're not zeroing it out, we're not, you know, gutting the program, a simple 12% reduction, which I think we owe the American people the responsible thing to do, which we have to make reductions. And it says this proposal would eliminate only those programs that neither provide life-saving treatment nor support American interests. So this is not, the opposition likes to make this sound like we are gutting programs and leaving, you know, leaving people dying in the streets, but that's not the case. These are modest cuts. These are modest rescissions, and it's very difficult to listen to them saying that we're doing all of these horrible things, and well, this is really the truth. And Mr. Adderholt, you had a comment.
Let me just add that some of the examples that of the ways that we have seen, $1.5 million to advance diversity and equity inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities, $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam, and the list goes on and on. And that's what this rescission package is trying to do, to address those things. And like you said, it's a very small portion that's being rescinded, but to hear the other side, it sounds like everything's been decimated, and that's just not the case.
I appreciate that. And
$1.4
you
billion.
know, as we take a look at, you know, and then we talk a little bit about NPR, and, you know, the programs that they're funding, they're busy using taxpayer dollars for programs that are called When Civility is Used as a Cudgel Against People of Color. In 2021, NPR lamented that animals deserve pronouns too. And then we've got, when we're talking about children's programs, they have a show called, it's a drag queen, and it's a children's program called Little Miss Hot Mess. They've got another one, the hips on the drag queen go swish, swish, swish. That does not sound like children's programming to me. That sounds like a political agenda.
Exactly.
And the American people are fed up with it. And so I think these are very modest as things go. As we look at our debt, we have to be responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And so I think, and you know, Mr. Adderholt, you pointed out a few of the programs and some of these, and woke programs, and the chairwoman did. And so I think that that certainly when you look at what is going on here, these are modest cuts, and we are trying to get at things that that the American people don't agree with.
And we even mentioned about the $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru.
Yeah.
The $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. And again, the list goes on.
Yeah, on and on. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Fishbach. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you. I would first yield to the ranking member.
I feel like I'm in the twilight zone here. I mean, basically downplaying the cuts that have already been made and downplaying these cuts that are in this rescissions package. Just to repeat, and maybe you all think this is nothing, and maybe it's something to joke about, but we know that because of the cuts in USAID, we already know that over 106,000 adults and over 200,000 children have already died. We know that the disruption in PEPFAR already has resulted in more than 50,000 adults and 6,000 children dying. We know that because of the cutbacks that have already been made, more than 29,000 people, children, have died of malaria. And we know that over 25,000 people have died of tuberculosis. I mean, I'm sorry, that's a big deal to me. You know, it's a bigger deal than than removing the tax on gun silencers that has been on the books for a century. But I think maybe that's the difference here. That's the difference in our values and in our priorities. I find it appalling that people can sit here and just downplay the deaths that have already occurred and not even give a damn about the deaths that will occur as a result of these cuts. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Thank you. I want to thank Ranking Member DeLauro for reviewing the constitutional significance of this rescission bill. I have to say the best thing about that bill is that it represents a long overdue confession or recognition by the Trump White House of Congress's Article I powers. By submitting this bill, the White House and Speaker admit that the president doesn't have the power to delay or cancel congressional budget authority without first submitting the proposed rescissions to Congress so that Congress can review the request and determine whether to enact all or part or none of the rescissions. And that's why we should have a fulsome hearing and debate process with respect to these proposed rescissions, because they're being presented to us on a wing and a prayer and a bunch of lies. So, it's just ridiculous that this is how it's coming to us. Look, rescission is a process created by law, enacted by Congress during the Nixon administration. And stop me if you've heard this before. President Nixon tried to illegally impound public funds when he claimed that he was cutting them to prevent unproven fraud, waste, and abuse in order to justify tax cuts for billionaires and big business. It's the same play that we're seeing here today. It's not a new playbook. We've heard and will continue to hear a lot of nonsense from our colleagues, but they're dancing around the obvious. This bill is a sham. Elon Musk's Doge efforts were a resounding failure, reportedly even ending up in maybe a little fisticuffs in the Oval Office or nearby when people called him on it. So Doge has probably been the most inefficient and wasteful White House project in American history. In his short stint playing at being a public servant, Musk failed to find any real causes of fraud, waste, or abuse, and not for lack of trying. He didn't find any because that was never the objective. The real goal was to promote some weird culture war agenda and wage war on the nation's civil servants, people who serve the public faithfully, all in order to benefit the billionaire buddies and donors and Mar-a-Lago dudes. The federal budget is arguably the most scrutinized document in the whole country. It is monitored by multiple federal agencies. It's overseen by Congress. There used to be dozens of inspectors general before the current administration fired them, and it's regularly analyzed by outside experts. The programs that Musk and his Doge brothers claimed to expose were already open to scrutiny, public scrutiny, whether through congressional processes, through oversight by Congress, and through a publicly accessible website, which has been around since, I think, 2006. So in the absence of actual fraud and waste, Doge and the White House manufactured and continue to this day to repeat absurd and easily disproven lies about transgender mice and 150-year-old Social Security recipients. So this Doge effort has all been about misdirection to mischaracterize and slander important federal programs so that they can be cut under the pretense of routing waste in order to justify the biggest corporate giveaway in American history. Republicans cannot fix the country's fiscal problems by cutting polio shots for kids and killing Big Bird. It just doesn't work. We can't close the deficit by targeting only non-defense discretionary spending and continuing to transfer our nation's wealth from our poorest citizens to the wealthiest billionaires by cutting essential services for Americans and supercharging fiscally ruinous tax cuts. But Republicans have made it clear they don't care about these facts. And by focusing only on non-defense discretionary funding, they're not pushing fiscal reform. They're pushing a radical social agenda on the entire country. So think about what we're talking about here. Republicans are going to completely zero out funding for PBS, including, of course, educational programming for you or your kids. Republicans have been trying to kill Big Bird and Cookie Monster for over 30 years, and now Trump would like to actually do it. In this bill, Republicans are completely gutting the funds for many of our most successful and effective foreign policy programs, programs that promote America's leadership and reputation abroad, programs that counter the influence of China and Russia. Mr. McGovern and Ms. DeLauro have already talked about the harm that will occur from the proposal to zero out PEPFAR, which for a very small sum of money has saved 26 million people across the world from dying of AIDS and has allowed nearly 8 million babies to be born HIV-free. But I'm also thinking about programs like polio vaccination, which with bipartisan support from groups like Rotary had nearly eradicated that dread disease, but with the suspension of US programs is now making a comeback. I'm thinking about our support for anti-corruption efforts in Central America, where for a couple $100, we've been able to change conditions that lead to migration to the US at a fraction of the cost of the border walls and military theatrics that this administration is using instead. At a time when China is spending vast sums of money and resources to buy influence around the world, why on earth should we cut programs that foster relationships with our allies and would-be allies? This rescissions package is a huge handout to our adversaries, and I guarantee you that Moscow and Beijing are celebrating. I also want to point out another program that may be needlessly cut by this Republican bill, the International Fund for Ireland. This funding represents the U.S.'s commitment to one of this country's biggest foreign policy victories in the last 50 years, the Good Friday Accord, which established a peace process to end a cycle of violence and brought peace to the island of Ireland. In the Good Friday Accord, the U.S. committed to be a guarantor of that peace process, and our support for the International Fund for Ireland is an integral and critical part of that commitment. No matter what we hear today from our Republican colleagues, cutting $9.4 billion is not going to do a damn thing to fix the deficit. But these cuts are going to have widespread consequences, both at home and abroad. Truth is, if the Republicans wanted, they could work with Democrats in good faith to find a path forward for meaningful fiscal consolidation to address the deficit and the national debt. But that does not appear to be the goal of this process. You know, during this whole process, I found it odd that not once did our Republican colleagues seek to rout actual Medicare fraud, which could, in theory, generate major savings for the country. And it's important to think through why that is. You don't solve Medicare fraud by cutting people's health care. You solve it by hiring and empowering auditors and lawyers who can investigate fraudsters and recover lost funds. It's estimated that every dollar spent on exposing Medicare fraud enforcement brings back $16, but this fraud is not committed by individuals. It's committed by companies, insurers, providers, medical device companies, and God forbid Republicans bite the hands that feed them. So instead of sensible policies to tackle fraud and bring money to the Treasury, we get this, a damaging rescissions practice that will jeopardize lives and harm our international alliances, an administration that is illegally withholding $500 billion of congressionally appropriated funds, and a Republican Congress that's pushing legislation that will increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion and take away health care from 16 million Americans. No sane, honest person can argue that this is fiscally responsible. And while billionaires and millionaires get their handout, 16 million Americans are likely to lose their health care, and nearly every working American will have the burden of the cost of the president's tariffs. It's a massive scam. Beyond the actual text of this rescissions bill, it's really important we highlight the fact that today's rule is also reportedly going to include provisions that will make significant policy changes to the Republican reconciliation bill, which you will recall was rushed through Congress with such haste in a series of hearings which started or ended in the middle of the night, and which was so rushed that many of our Republican colleagues now claim that they didn't know what was in the bill. But now that the Speaker is going to make major changes to that bill without any transparency or scrutiny, it's thousands of pages of bill. It directly impacts every single American. But now we're hiding the contents of the bill by tucking legislative tricks into a rule about another piece of legislation. So how offensive is it that this big, ugly bill, which is supposed to be the centerpiece of the Trump agenda, is being changed after it's already been voted on by the House of Representatives? How bad are these amendments that leadership has to resort to these kind of tricks? For that reason alone, all those Republican members who now say they voted for the big, ugly reconciliation bill without knowing what was in it, they should vote against this bill or they should vote against this rule so they can have the opportunity to debate and vote on the bill with full knowledge of what is actually in it and to be completely transparent to their constituents. So, Ranking Member DeLore, I did have a couple questions for you. The rescission package proposes to rescind over half the budget for international development and economic assistance. This funding promotes democracy in authoritarian countries, helps people fleeing conflict, and saves millions of children from starvation. If we cut these funds, aren't we turning our backs on the people and countries we've pledged to support?
Well, the answer to that is yes, but I believe that countries around the globe are beginning to believe that the U.S. can't be counted on, that our word is not our bond. I think we've proven that with regard to Ukraine. I think we just turn our backs to allies who have been countries that we have been allies for years, whether it is Canada, whether it is UK, whether it is the European countries. And I really do believe today that they view that we can't be a trusted partner in what they want to do. But the things that you have ticked off that are in this bill, and particularly, I mentioned Gavi, the vaccination issue, and by the way, China is hot to be a part of that. They went in on COVID when we would not do that and provide the international aid to assist these countries with the COVID pandemic. But we've talked about global health programs with the state and USAID. We've talked about PEPFAR, that we are the international peacekeeping. We're not interested in doing that in order that there be cuts would undermine operations like the UN mission in Lebanon with UNIFIL. Progress is already underway, further destabilizing that region, and we know we can't destabilize that region. Migration and refugee assistance. This is about people escaping violence and hunger. That is what we do. And this is, refugee populations are rising in Sudan, in Burma, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Venezuela. And where are we in this? If we are not there, then our own national security is at real risk. This is economic support and development assistance. This is vital assistance to Egypt, Jordan. Jordan is one of our strongest allies, the most stable country in the Middle East. And we turn our back on Jordan and the assistance that they need. The Pacific Islands. We weaken efforts to counter China's growing influence. We take resources away from the poorest countries. We have forcing 40 million children out of school, denying over 6 million smallholder farmers access to improved seeds and fertilizer. That heightens the risk of future food crises and starvation. And if anybody remembers, the French Revolution was fought over the price of bread. And if you don't have food to feed your kids and so forth, you know, you revolt, or you go to the people who will provide you with that food for you and your family. And if it's not the United States, who will it be? Halting clean water access for 3.6 million people and the spread of disease and preventable deaths. You know, it goes on. It goes on. And, you know, to make light of the fact that, you know, of what our position is in the world order, to which we are backing away every single day. We are no longer the trusted partner of the free world as we have been in the past. And that, quite frankly, is a disgrace.
I think your point is extremely well taken. I mean, these are programs that Congress authorized, Congress set up, Congress funded from a combination of motives. I mean, I hear from our faith-based communities all the time about how important it is that we are feeding people, that we're preventing disease, that we are assisting refugees, hearing from Catholic Relief Services, from the Lutheran Services, from Hyacinth Council, from all these different groups, bipartisan groups, which have supported these programs since their inception. But there's also, as you suggest, there are national security implications as well. It's one of these classic situations where you do well by doing good. You observe the humanitarian reasons for keeping these programs afloat, but you also protect our national security, you protect our health.
You have assistance to Europe, Eurasia, and Central Asia. It's a $460 million cut. Ukraine is the largest recipient of the eliminated funding directed to anti-corruption activities, agriculture and food security, resiliency on the energy grid. It eliminated funding also impacts support for Moldova, Armenia, Georgia, which count on U.S. assistance to counter the threat of Russian aggression. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't want to counter China's influence in the world or Russia's aggression and countering that, and at the same time just take away all of the tools that allow us to be that force for their survival and for the survival of democracy around the world. And it's dangerous. It is dangerous to the United States of America and the direction that it's going. I'll just make this one last comment because I can't stop going back to this. These cuts are illegal. There should be no debate about that. When you look at me like that, read the documentation. Let's go back. No, you haven't. 150 pages going back to 1789, where Antonin Scalia didn't know what he was talking about. Rehnquist doesn't know what he's talking about. Roberts didn't know what he was talking about. Kavanaugh doesn't know what he was talking about. Alexander Hamilton, the founders of this nation, didn't know what he was talking about, where there is the power of the purse, which is enshrined in the Constitution, and it is enshrined in the United States Congress and not in the presidency. And these examples will show you that the only way that funds were either delayed or approved was through the power inserted by the Congress. I would like to place this in the record so that people can read it and understand this myth of the president's ability to impound.
Without objection. Ms. Scanlon?
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony, Ranking Member. You know, aside from the constitutional reasons, the actual impact on people, this is all so misguided, this whole penny-wise, pound-foolish approach of this administration in general, but particularly with respect to the rescissions that are before us today. The idea that you would cut these really impactful, low-dollar investments in health and security in favor of much more expensive military solutions is astonishing and I think extremely misguided. Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Langworthy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Alderholt, we're hearing a lot of claims today about how these cuts would jeopardize lives. But when DOGE went into the investigation of USAID and other programs, they found that the percentage of taxpayer dollars that really made its way to actually helping people, as so many of us thought they were, was shockingly small given the largesse provided to these organizations in USAID as a whole year over year. Could you speak to that in some of what was found in these programs?
Yes, I think I think what should be noted is that the other side here this afternoon has been making the argument that we are decimating these programs. Most of these programs there's cuts where we're just looking at waste, fraud, and abuse. We're not cutting the entire programs, and we're trying to make it more effective and more efficient. And myself and some of the other members of this committee have already mentioned countless examples of what we've seen in the Biden administration, what they were doing. And President Biden had 4 years to identify the unnecessary programs of the instances of waste, fraud, and abuse. And all that time, he never sent a rescission package to Congress. President Trump began identifying the programs that were unnecessary the first day he took office. He has recommended a modest set of reduction, and I stress it's a modest set when you look at the overall totals. And it is our position from the appropriation standpoint, we believe the package deserves a vote up or down on the House floor.
No, I appreciate that. And we do hear a lot of sky is falling routine here in Congress, and we have throughout the whole year how, any change to a baseline, spending bill is the end of all good things. And I mean, the term "people are going to die" is something that is constantly used by the other side to try to scare constituents and taxpayers into turning against the change that they voted for in November. So I really appreciate, your work and the hard work of the Appropriations Committee on this. I look forward to supporting the rescissions package, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Negouche, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Adderholt and Ranking Member DeLauro for being here and for your testimony, and appreciate your insights regarding the package that the House Republicans have brought us to consider today. Mr. Adderholt, I want to ask you a couple questions. So I have a press release here. This is from June 10th, so just a few days ago. This is from your Majority Leader, Stephen Scalise, in describing the bill, H.R. 4, the Rescissions Act of 2025. And he says in this press release that this bill would, quote, codifies President Trump's cuts to wasteful foreign aid initiatives, as well as woke public broadcasting. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And it also says, quote, this legislation cuts $9.4 billion in waste, end quote. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. And you'd characterize the programs that are being cut and rescinded as waste. You've said that at great length. Why did you vote in favor of those programs when you voted for the CR 3 months ago?
When these programs, I knew that we had a new administration that will be coming in and be looking at it. The president has said from day one that he wants to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse that are in these programs.
But why didn't you get rid of them?
Well, because a lot of these, we send the money to the administration, and they have decided on their own to unilaterally do these programs. This is not something that Congress gave these particular.
You appropriated.
We appropriated the money, but this was decided at a agency level.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm missing something here, Mr. Adderholt. Let me just take a step back. So, the $9.4 billion that the administration wants to rescind funding for, right? This is funding that Congress appropriated. You voted for those appropriations 3 months ago.
with the understanding what the president would be cutting out.
So I get it. So I guess the argument is, I'll vote for, let's say, funding public television with the understanding that President Trump will ask us 3 months from now to cut the very funding that I'm voting for. I don't really understand why. Like, why not just not appropriate those dollars 3 months ago? What was the point? Why not just say, like, 3 months ago, you all could have decided, Republicans could have said, you know what, this $9.1 billion, it's waste, it's fraud. We're not going to give it to the administration. We're just going to not appropriate those dollars. You're on the Appropriations Committee, correct? You're the chairman of the subcommittee, the relevant subcommittee here. So, I mean, you have the power to do that. That's what I'm trying to figure out is why didn't you all do that?
Well, again, a lot of these particulars, we knew, I think many of us on the Republican side knew that we had a new administration in town that would be using this money wisely and not doing what we had seen in the Trump and the Biden administration.
I hear you. I mean, I think it's what you said previously. Again, I'm going to just try to figure this out. What I'm saying is that as the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee, you have the power to say, I'm not going to vote to appropriate money for public television because I disagree with it, or I think it's waste, I think it's fraud, or I'm not going to vote for foreign aid initiatives because I think it's fraud, I think it's waste. You could decide to do that, and you don't have to go through this entire process of sort of kabuki theater where you appropriate billions of dollars and send them to the administration only so that the administration can come back and tell you now that those funds should be rescinded. It doesn't, and by the way, several of your colleagues voted against the CR for that reason, right? So they basically made the argument, my Republican colleagues said.
There are probably various reasons they voted against it.
Sure, but I think some of them have said, you know Mr. Massey as well as I do, right? He said, look, this budget contains fraud and waste and abuse, and I'm not funding it. I don't want to support that kind of waste, and so I'm voting against it. You made a different decision, as did many of your colleagues, and I guess what I'm saying is I just think that you could understand why the American people would be confused to hear your colleagues, right, and you yourself say, this is waste, this is fraud, this is the worst wasteful spending that we've ever seen, but just forget the fact that I voted for it a few months ago.
Well, many of these programs are not being unilaterally just decimated. They're trying to get the waste, fraud, and abuse. That is what the president is going after, and that's what I totally support, and that's why I support what the president's doing here. So waste, fraud, and abuse is something that the American people voted for this president because he gave examples when he ran as president that we've seen in this government, and we've listed many of the things here today that happened in the last administration.
You made a compelling case, but I'm just confused why you voted for it. So that's it. That's all I'm really trying to figure out. But anyway, Ms. DeLauro?
This administration would do right with this money.
That really has having a crystal ball, knowing what the administration is going to do. No one quite knows what it's going to do day by day.
Would you care to expand? I mean, am I understanding this right, or I don't? What part of this? Does the administration? It just got $9 billion in a pot of money, and so it decides where it goes. Is that how?
This is a kabuki dance here.
These are specific programs that were appropriated.
Democrats, sort of one, voted against the continuing resolution. Every Republican voted for a continuing resolution with all of this money there. Their president, our president, he is president of the United States, said that, hey, Congress, I don't care what you do. I don't care what each individual member who voted forward, I don't care what you do. I am going to steal that money because I don't like it. And I would also, in two ways, has our Republican colleagues turned over the power of the Congress and the power of the purse to the executive. And I don't care who the executive is. I'm not willing to turn that power over. You did it with a continuing resolution because that puts all of the power in the hands of the executive. And you're doing it now with allowing their impounding and stealing the money that we said we wanted to appropriate for the goods and services that the people of the United States need.
Well, and I would say, just building on that, Madam Ranking Member, I think the Trump administration, Mr. Adderholt and OMB and Mr. Vogt, they're going to put you all in a tricky situation here in the coming months, because I suspect what they're going to do, once this is, this, I presume, will pass the House. I don't think it's going to pass the Senate, but we'll see. But they intend to, it sounds like, send more rescissions packages to the House. And they're going to put you, or maybe a different subcommittee, but your colleagues, I should say, on the Appropriations Committee, in a difficult position of having to come before this committee and label as waste appropriations for programs that you all voted for. And that's my point, is I just don't, I think that that's a very, I understand why Mr. Vogt believes that these programs are waste. I disagree with his characterization, but I understand. I don't understand how any member who voted for it 3 months ago can now vote to repeal the funding today. But
Well, again, you got to remember
Sure.
that when we pass these appropriation bills, we don't micromanage every single dollar. That this is what the administration has been doing in the past with this money. This administration wants to stop it and wants to get it. And so I would welcome more rescission package where they see waste, fraud, and abuse that has crept up and that they have found in these programs. So
yeah, but Mr. Adderholt, you know that several of these programs are wholesale eliminations. They're not, there's no ambiguity with respect to the appropriations that the Congress approved that they're now eliminating. So there's not, I hear what you're saying, that there are some programs in which they have discretion, right? So how they're spending the money is your point, that they're, let's say they're uncovering some type of waste or fraud and they're sending it back. But my point is, there's no ambiguity about a line item for public broadcasting.
Yeah,
That's a very clear.
You are correct, but
right, that's my point. It's like
but
if
it
you,
is being submitted by the White House as provided on the Congressional Budget Impoundment Act of '74, and Congress will have an opportunity to vote up or down on this.
Yes, no, I get it. Look, what I'm
So
saying.
they're not just taking it unilaterally.
No,
without
but that's
Congress
not what I'm
permission.
suggesting, Mr. Adderholt. What I'm suggesting is, I understand that Mr. Massey voted against allocating dollars to public broadcasting. And so now that President Trump has submitted a rescission budget here, rescissions, a package, to rescind funding for public broadcasting, I understand why he'll vote for that. I don't understand how members who voted to fund public broadcasting, not 10 years ago, not a year ago, 3 months ago, will now say, actually, we were wrong, President Trump is right, we should wipe the slate clean. But let's talk about public broadcasting, because I think it's an instructive example, in my view. You're, of course, familiar with Alabama Public Television,
Absolutely.
right? Do you know how much of their funding they receive from the federal government?
Oh, I was talked with the Alabama Public Television. It's I think less than 20%.
Yep, you're spot on. You know you've done your homework. It's 13%. 13%. So you're comfortable with cutting that funding, because obviously that's what you're voting for, unless I can change your mind.
Well,
but
like
I mean,
I
you
said, there
understand
are
that
a lot
Alabama
of
Public.
public
Let me
television-
finish, sir, and then I'll give you a chance, of course. You understand that with the passage of this package, Alabama Public Television will receive a 13% cut in their funding, and you're comfortable with that.
I understand that will be cut, yes.
But you're comfortable with it. I mean, you're voting for it.
Well,
so.
I am voting for the package. That is what the president has submitted. And like I say, Alabama is not, we're not going to be voting just on Alabama.
Sure.
It's going to be for the entire nation. And because Alabama has done a good job with some of the things they've done. But
Why cut them?
But unfortunately, they're in the package with all the others. So maybe we can.
Have you tried taking them out?
I may work with you on that.
Well, I'd love if you could include Colorado too, because Colorado's done some great
I don't
things.
know, I got to look at Colorado first.
I'm happy to give you some materials that I think would be very persuasive.
Unfortunately, there's been a lot of states that have poisoned the well, and unfortunately, that's hurt Alabama.
But what a shame that is for the people of Alabama. I guess that's my point. I mean,
It is a shame that they have done that.
Well, let's fix it. Let's change that. I mean, why not?
All right,
Why
I look
vote on
forward
this
to working
package?
with you on it, that we can agree on, that I'll get a proposal.
Could we work on that before this gets to the floor? Because it would be a shame for the people of Alabama and the people of Colorado to lose
After this
access to
rescission
public
package is
broadcasting.
passed, we'll do a,
Massachusetts, I haven't talked to the chairwoman yet, but she might be passionate about North Carolina. I digress. I'm sorry. One last question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. And I would say I'll advocate for North Carolina public television too. I'm happy to to be an advocate, and Mr. Adderholt, you know, maybe there's a way we could talk before this gets to the floor so that Alabama public television doesn't get cut, because I think that would be a real shame. My understanding, you can correct me here, well, maybe I'll ask you instead of stating stating as a fact. Do you know if any of the Alabama newspapers, television stations, do they have any reporters up here in Washington these days? A lot of our local press, they've had to cut back, so they don't have, in Colorado, for example, we only have a few people here in Washington that are covering the Congress. Do you know if Alabama has anybody up here?
With public television?
Public, private, you name it.
I know they used to. I don't know what the current status is.
We looked, and the only person we could find is someone affiliated with the Alabama Public Television. That's it. So the state of Alabama, as far as we can tell, the only reporter that's up here in Washington on Capitol Hill covering matters relevant to the folks that you represent is from Alabama Public Television. And I'm pretty sure once you all finish gutting public television, public radio, I imagine they're going to have to bring that person back. So I don't, to me, that doesn't seem, I'm sure you believe in transparency like I do. I would think we'd want to keep the media watchdogs here in Washington, and I can't imagine that cutting Alabama public television by 13%.
I would love to work with you to get funding for Alabama public television, because it has not been subject to these woke policies that so many other states have, and therefore we can work together on this.
Well, you're the chairman of the subcommittee. You represent Alabama. You've been in
I need some
Congress.
Democrat votes.
You've been in Congress a long time. So look, all I know is when I go back to Colorado, I'm hoping this bill, of course, as you can probably imagine, given the nature of our exchange here, that I'm against it, and I'm hoping that it fails on the floor. And when I go back to Colorado, I'll be able to tell my constituents that I fought to keep Colorado Public Television, Colorado Public Radio, that public media outlet, those outlets rather, alive. And I think it's going to be very difficult for some of my colleagues on the side of the aisle. Some of them obviously don't want, these funding streams to continue. But for those that have said that they do, it's going to be awfully hard for them to make that argument with a straight face back home. But anyway, I see the chairwoman is.
Chatting.
Yeah, all right. I'll yield back, or I'll give the chairwoman, the ranking member, an opportunity to respond.
It's really, this cuts journalism in rural areas. Coverage of local news, events, threaten public safety. Rural stations would be forced to close. 70% of federal funding for public media is awarded directly to locally owned public television stations and public radio stations. I think that what we need is a list of every state, every district, and what is about to be lost. Because you hear us, we're going to rectify it for Alabama the same way we dealt with Oklahoma and Social Security offices, but the hell with the rest of the country. The hell with the rest of the country. And that can't stand.
Well, and I've got, thank you, Madam Ranking Member, and perhaps I'll introduce a bill, and we can call it the Save Alabama Public Television and Colorado Public Television Bill, and it could just be a rescission of this rescissions package, because that's
I will take a
precisely
look
what
and see what Colorado Public Television's done.
Okay.
We'll see if
Well,
it passed the test.
Well, I mean, let's hope.
That's cherry pick.
One would, anyway, I'll yield back. We belabored it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I do have a couple of questions, but I will tell you, my last interview with this NPR, I just think back to it and laugh, because I actually got on the call a little earlier than the editor did. And then the editor got on the call and literally, with me on the call, instructed the reporter on what they needed to get me to say to match the narrative. I wish that I had it recorded. Needless to say, we did not go through with the interview with them. Clearly one of the most biased organizations I've ever been affiliated with, and as I said, I wish that I had had it recorded. It's a lesson learned by me to make sure that you're recording the calls too, because of how these biased organizations are going to shift around what you actually say. So I've got a question for the two of you real quick. Have either of you ever been to Hyderabad? Have you ever been to Hyderabad?
I have not.
Have you?
In
You have not. I've been there. I've been to Hyderabad, but one of the questions here is about the cuts to the clinic in Hyderabad, right? And so what I will tell you is Hyderabad is one of the tech meccas of the world, and specifically it's working to become the health tech mecca of the world. It has a population of about 7 million people in that area. Now we're talking about a $35,000 reduction from USAID. Just factually speaking, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Boeing, IBM, a lot of the largest corporations in the world, a lot of large U.S. corporations have huge facilities in Hyderabad. And Hyderabad's budget is massive. It's massive. In fact, there's a news article, I think it may have been Reuters, may have been India Times, they're about to spend $20 million on a beautification project. $20 million is what Hyderabad is spending of their own money on a beautification project. And now, based on the testimony of the Democrats, they want you to think that if we cut $35,000 in USAID projects to that area, that all of a sudden the people of Hyderabad are going to start dying. It's just not true. We have no business funding projects in Hyderabad. USAID should be delivering food and medical aid to people who are in dire straits. Hyderabad is one of the wealthiest places in India. They have plenty of money to fund their own health clinics, and we have no business funding clinics in that area. And I, for one, I'm glad that we're taking a look at USAID. I'm glad that USAID is being put under the State Department. They have had a very serious problem with certain people in that organization being agenda-driven, not mission-driven. They did not respect the culture on the continent of Africa, and they went in with LGBTQ initiatives into countries on Africa where that's actually illegal, and they put that agenda ahead of the mission. And when we talk about getting kicked out of certain areas and the Russians and the Chinese and coming in and replacing us, and I want to say this, I support the mission of delivering food and medical aid to poor people around the world. The USAID mission must be consistent with the State Department mission. The previous administration's own ambassadors, their own ambassadors, had asked them to stop with the agenda-driven stuff and get back to the humanitarian-based stuff. And the people at USAID would not give up on the agenda. And they put the mission of USAID at risk by being agenda-driven. You can look at me like that all you want to. I know it personally. I go to, no, it's my time, and I listen, it's my time. It's my time, and I spend a lot of time on the continent of Africa, and I know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so do I.
And I've had the discussions with the ambassadors personally, and I had the discussions with Samantha Powers personally. I'm glad we're rescinding this stuff. USAID needs to follow the State Department. It needs to be mission-oriented, not agenda-oriented, and we have no business funding projects or whatever we want to call them in areas that are as wealthy as Hyderabad. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You know, and I think you started it exactly right, Ranking Member DeLauro. You started by pointing out that Trump has done nothing to bring down the cost of groceries, nothing to bring down the cost of groceries. Instead, Donald Trump and Elon Musk spent the last 4 months taking a chainsaw to the programs Americans actually do believe in. And now Republicans want us to put gas in that chainsaw. I'm not willing to do it because I'm not going to bless the destruction of cherished public radio and television programs, healthcare, medical research, and international aid. We've heard already about the deaths that have already occurred. So when you say we are scaring people by saying people are going to die, Republicans acknowledge people are going to die. The Yale just did a study saying that bad billionaires bill is going to cost 50,000 lives a year. So we're not making this up. But the other thing, we're not making it up because they're already dying because of what's happened. And we keep hearing that they're doing this to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. Waste, fraud, and abuse. Let's talk a little bit about waste and fraud, right? Trump and Musk, you know where I'm going, right? Trump and Musk have profited immensely from his presidency. Trump and his family's net worth has increased $2.9 billion since he took office. $2.9 billion. You know what that's worth? 4 years of funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So if we just kind of eliminated the fraud and abuse that we're seeing from this presidency, we could fund those important public broadcasting programs. You know, Trump and Musk, they've broken up, but we have their offspring still continues, right? That awful Doge. And it has cost us $135 billion. Doge has cost the American taxpayers $135 billion, and that doesn't include any of the cost of all those lawsuits, right, Ranking Member? So, you know, the $9 billion that they want to save here, right? They're going to destroy USAID, and they're going to basically, you know, cut off the knees off of Big Bird. Musk contracts $48 billion. So we could fund the programs across the country that prevent infectious disease, that prevent the kind of deaths that I don't have the time to go into right now, if we would just not have the fraud and abuse with those contracts. But Ranking Member DeLauro, I did want to get to the issues about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, because you touched a bit about it, and the whole idea that, I'm sorry, Representative Adderholt, you know how important that public broadcasting is for Alabama. You were so uncomfortable when they were talking about, and you would like to save it, but I'd like to save it for New Mexico too, and we'd like to save it for everybody across this country. You understand that, right? And I'm going to ask Ranking Member DeLauro, you look very appreciative of that, so I feel bad for you because you're in this spot for, you know,
again,
Alabama's no,
again,
Alabamans know
if
you're
I
not
could-
going to
if I
vote
could
for their
interject
programs.
here, you do have some states that have used their money wisely, but unfortunately, there are so many states that have not with public broadcasting.
Oh, no, I can go there.
And
Because
they
you know
have-
what?
they
I'm
have
sorry,
had these
Mr.
woke agendas.
I'm
and
sorry,
it's-
Mr. Adderholt. If Alabama is using their money wisely, I can guarantee you New Mexico is using their money wisely. Representative DeLauro, you really wanted to talk a little bit more about the importance of these programs, and I'll give you that time.
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, send us a list. This is whether it has been, we asked you people at USAID, send us a list of the programs that are not working, and what is the criteria of which you ended those. This was 2 months ago to, what is his name, Navarro, whatever his name was, and we have yet to hear back. Tell us what are the states that have not, the public broadcasting has been contrary to its purpose. No, there's just a lot of verbiage, et cetera. But I will tell you that they cut journalism in rural areas. That's local news and events that threaten public safety and emergency alerts, which will no longer be there. This is the alert system for tornadoes, for wildfires, for hurricanes. And FM and AM signals are essential in evacuation scenarios. By statute, 70% of federal funding for public media, by statute, is awarded directly to locally owned public television stations and public radio stations. You've got more than 1,200 local public radio stations, 365 local public television stations. You know, yes, you can just tell them you're all out of business because we think you're not doing the right programming. But where is the evidence? Where is that evidence? This is, you know, it is. If you say it's going to, you want to save Alabama, as the gentlewoman said, she wants to save New Mexico. We've got Connecticut. We want North Carolina. We've got Texas. We've got Massachusetts. We've got Colorado. What is this? You're going to dial a phone and say, oh, Alabama's okay, but the rest are not okay. That's the way this government is being run. And that has to do with tech companies calling up and saying, hey, don't deal with any tariffs that affect me, you know, so you're exempted. let's get real about
Does
what
that
the heck
sound like waste, fraud, and abuse when you actually
Well,
are
listen, I
doing
want to
things
talk
well?
about waste, fraud, and abuse. You want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse?
but who's got a
It's about a
phone call?
tax cut, $4.5 trillion. My colleague said who this stuff is going to. Hyderabad is going to $35,000. We got hundreds of millions of dollars going to corporations who pay zero taxes today, zero. And we can give you a list of all of those. That's waste, fraud, and abuse. $48 billion to Elon Musk for his contracts. I have to agree with the president. Why don't we just end all of his contracts? I'm there. Let's do that in a heartbeat so we can get rid of that. You know, this is unconscionable, which is being done, and it's being done in the name of something that is I don't even know what woke programming is in this.
It's something that they've made up, but
It's made up. It's a construct.
But, you know, and the thing is the same way that we heard Representative Adderall sort of support his world programming in Alabama, I'd like to enter into the record, Madam Chair, world Republicans used to back NPR, then MAGA changed everything. It's an article from the Washington Post.
Without objection.
And, you know, when you think about why did they support this? They supported this world programming because it was important, because, as you pointed out, it did all of these things. Somebody said on the dais over here on the Republican side, oh, we're not cutting anything that is life-threatening. Well, you know what? Hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, those are life-threatening, and you know who announces those? Do they do this in Alabama, Mr. Adderall? Where it is your public radio stations that are letting people know about the incoming tornadoes, hurricanes, floods. That's what happens everywhere. And we have letters after letters of Hurricane Helene, right? People were relying solely on public radio because that's all that existed. And then what I love best is in North Carolina, I love this, is like their members were saying, well, you know what? We listen to bluegrass music on our NPR, and then commodity prices for corn, soybeans, pork that are updated every half hour along with the weather. These are the kinds of things that people are getting from their public radio. And you ask why did Republicans like you, Mr. Adderall, and I don't know why you changed your mind about your Alabama.
Well, I've always, NPR is in a different category.
Well, public
most
radio.
Republicans have had great concerns about NPR.
But public radio, that you just, at the CBS, Corporation for Public Radio, and it might be that Donald Trump, that the answer to they used to support it and now they don't, is because he did a tweet. No more funding for NPR, a total scam. And you know what? This is what we're getting. We're getting rubber stamp Republicans. Rubber stamp Republicans. Because whatever he wants, they do. And Congress doesn't want us to be rubber stamping the president. They expect us to do our job. And that's what we should be doing here. And Mr. Adderall, I wanted to go through something else that I know you care a lot about, and that's the debt and the deficit. I was looking at a piece you actually did back in 2010 where you were complaining. I think you've taken a stance through your career that you are against debt and deficits and running that up. Is that correct?
Well, and I think when it's, most members of Congress are.
So in 2010, you wrote an op-ed and you said, you know, this is really horrible. I'm paraphrasing, because right now we have $13.3 trillion in debt and a $1.4 trillion deficit, right? Do you remember writing that, or is that something that's...
It's been a while back.
It's been a while, but that's like what you were thinking. Do you know what happened with the deficit, with the debt?
It's exploded.
Deficit after you wrote that in 2010? We had an Obama presidency, and it went down. In a Republican, when we have Republican presidents, the deficit goes up. And then in the 6 years following that
Do you have
op-ed
the
you
debt
wrote,
on
it
there as
went
well?
down.
Do you have
And-
debt on there as well?
What?
Is the debt,
No, this is a chart about the deficit. And then what happened is we had Trump come in, and he did those tax cuts. And what happened to the chart? They went through the roof. So then Biden comes in, and even with what we had to spend to deal with the pandemic, brought the deficit down. But what does the bad billionaires bill or the big beautiful bill or whatever you want to call it,
Big beautiful
what does
bill.
it do? What does it do to the debt and the deficit?
Well, that's some opinion of it, yes.
There's some opinion. Well, the CBO, Madam Chair, may I enter into the record? The CBO estimates $3 trillion of debt from House-passed OBBBA. That's really, may I?
And
Without objection.
have the Congressional Budget Office been wrong in the past?
Well, not on this, actually. They've been wrong on a few things. They did not anticipate the pandemic, but then, did anybody really anticipate the pandemic? They didn't. They didn't. So the pandemic was something that did affect some of their projections, but really, they haven't been. And it's not just the CBO. Every other reputable, including conservative, outlets that have looked at that, the Cato Institute, go through it. They've all said this is increasing the debt and the deficit. And this $9 billion, what does it represent? And it took me a while to do this math, Ranking Member DeLauro, but the $9 billion that they want to save now, do you think it represents maybe 1% of the deficit? Not even, right? Not even. It's a molecule. It's not even a drop. It is so small, it's a molecule. They will destroy or standing across this planet. They will destroy the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They will cost the lives that we're talking about for a molecule of savings compared to their debt. Madam Ranking Member, I don't know if you wanted to address anything else. I'm the last Democrat on.
Look, I just think it's clear from the debate and the discussion that this is a construct, as I said in my remarks, this is about CYA. This is a group of people that don't believe in the Impoundment Control Act. They think it's unconstitutional. They have impounded and stolen funds. Now they want to rubber stamp, as you pointed out, through the mechanism that comes from that Impoundment Control Act, which is a legal process, but it's the cart before the horse. You want to do something like this, then you come to the Congress. You don't do it. So that this is, it's almost a wasted debate. There shouldn't have been any conclusion that even the 2025 budget, you voted for a continuing resolution. It says that means you continue the 2024 dollars, you carry them over to 2025, but no, that's not what you do. So you renege on what you did in voting for the resolution. You compound that with stealing the dollars through this impoundment process, and then you want to rubber stamp these rescissions for things that you don't happen to like, though it was voted on by Democrats, by Republicans, in the House and in the Senate, and signed by the president. That is kind of a basic tenet. Every school kid knows that the House votes, the Senate votes, Democrats vote, Republicans vote, you come together, you work it out, you signed a bill into law. Let's all go to see Schoolhouse Rock so that we know how a bill becomes law.
Maybe we need a Sesame Street episode on how a bill becomes
People are
law.
afraid of Big Bird and Ernie, for God's sakes. Face where we are really at. And this compounded by, this is a rescission package. But then you take a look at a reconciliation package. You can call it whatever you want. But it is unbelievable. It's Medicaid, it's Medicare, it's the Affordable Care Act, and let me just tell you, and 16 million people losing their health care coverage. And folks want to say that Medicare is not up for grabs. Well, let me just tell you what the Statutory Pay-Go Act said, that you go over the deficit, like $3 trillion over, that you then trigger sequestration. Sequestration says it's a 4% cut across everything. That means $500 billion in cuts to Medicare. So don't continue to lie to the American people that isn't going to be cut. This is talk about a Ponzi scheme that Musk said that with Social Security, this is a Ponzi scheme, and it is a house of cards, and it's going to come crashing down on you because the American public are beginning to understand what's happening to them and to their families. And that's what's the important piece here, is the consequences that you are raining on with the American people and domestically and internationally. That we are going to try to stop if we can with votes. And we hope that there may be some votes on the Republican side that understand what's going on and will join us in ending this charade.
Yeah, because basically Republicans want health care for working families. They want health care for the seniors who deserved it. They want to make sure that we feed our children, and what Republicans are doing is mugging Big Bird in broad daylight. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Cost of living.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Madam Chair, I'm listening to the discussion, and I hear our colleagues saying that this rescission package is merely a molecule in the makeup of federal spending. And then I wonder why they've spent so much time attacking the molecule. I think
The gentleman
thou
yield?
dost, no.
'Cause two things
no,
can be
my
true.
time. I think thou dost
could have died.
protest too much. It's my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Ranking Member. But I like to get through my stuff, and then if you want to say something, I might be willing to yield, but I like to get through my stuff. And so, you know, it's just kind of interesting. Let me also say that I agree with Mr. Scott when he says that what the USAID's mission was and what I understood it to be for most of my life, I support. I was on a trip a couple of years ago, went to a refugee camp in Africa, learned all about this peanut butter stuff that they helped to create and help to spread around, that if you can get this stuff, it comes in kind of a squeeze tube, and the stuff is incredible, and if you can get that to a child before their organs start shutting down, they live, and it doesn't take much time. It's amazing stuff. That's what I support. I support the USAID doing that. And since this controversy came up where it was clear that at least a significant portion of their money, I don't know how much, but more than a molecule, Madam Chair, was being spent on culture wars, and I don't think USAID is supposed to be involved in the culture wars on the right or the left. Doesn't matter to me whether it's coming from the right or the left. It's not our job to go in there and do that. Our purpose, as I understood their mission, Madam Chair, was to feed the little children and to do what they could do to make hunger less. And so I agree that it needs to be reorganized. I agree it needs to be revamped, and I think that the U.S. government, no matter what the agency is called in the future, needs to get back to the mission of making sure we're taking care of feeding those children. And when I talk to my constituents in the district about this, many of whom would tell you, because it's a relatively poor district, that they don't understand federal spending in foreign governments and so forth. They don't understand that. But when I talk to them about the peanut butter stuff, to a person, they nod and they go, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. So we may have to do some reorganization, but I just want to make it clear that I do support that because I'm going to talk about some other things. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask us to reflect back in time. The year is 2002. It's a tough time in the economy in Virginia. I was in the state legislature. We were facing a $2 billion shortfall. Legislature was out of session, and Virginia has a requirement to have a balanced budget. So the governor stepped in with the red pen and made cuts. That's what adults in leadership do. He cut 1,800 state jobs. Cuts were expected to cut up to 4,000 jobs at the state's universities and colleges. Community services were cut. Libraries were cut. Almost everything was on the table, including cultural items. One such program that was cut at the Library of Virginia, and which was one of my all-time favorites, Madam Chair, was the Virginia Cavalcade magazine. This is a part of my collection. They stopped publication in 2002 because the Commonwealth of Virginia could no longer afford it. And when I went and got my collection, I was just thrilled that the one that was on top was of the Little League game played in Norton in 1951, the first Little League game in the South with integrated teams. And it's fascinating to me because times change. People would think that the people of the mountains were racist, but in reality, it was the Charlottesville team that refused to let the integrated team play on their fields, so they had to play the game in Norton, in Southwest Virginia, in the mountains, in Appalachia. But this, as it's by its own definition, it was the quarterly illustrated magazine of Virginia history and culture, and it did all kinds of things. It did art. This is a big article on an artist from Southwest Virginia named Walter Biggs. This was about the Powhatans, and on and on. And it was a marvelous publication, but the governor had to cut. He did what he had to do. While there was angst about a number of the cuts that had to be made. The governor did what he had to do. And as a result, a lot of things got cut. And then Governor Mark Warner, now senator in the United States Senate from Virginia, made those cuts because that's what adult leadership does. Sometimes when you're facing a deficit and a debt of almost $37 trillion, you have to figure out, what can we cut? What can we cut? And so I would ask my colleague from Alabama, because I've heard all kinds of things. The rescission bill is not the reconciliation bill, is it? In fact, the rescission bill is a bill to cut spending. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And I would say I've heard lots of stuff here today. In fact, we finished with, I forget whether it was killing, whacking, cutting off at the knees, Big Bird. What's fascinating is, let's get the facts straight. The rescission does not touch Big Bird. It touches the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It has always perplexed me, and this has been my position since the 90s when I first started studying this stuff. Why in the world the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS never got, and they may have changed something recently, but to my knowledge, they have never gotten, and historically they didn't get any royalties from the corporation that owns Big Bird. They've never gotten any royalties, nothing, from Jim Henson Productions. Oh, they may pay for a particular show, they may, but the corporation owns all of those intellectual properties, and so when they do toys, dolls, Talking Elmo, when they do movies, and I heard today about spin-off TV shows, and if they're airing reruns, Corporation for Public Broadcasting gets nothing. And I understand that in the 1960s, that was fairly standard for television networks, but the production companies like Desilu, Viacom, Paramount, that would be the owners of the Star Trek merchandising and broadcasting rights, now partnered with CBS. But all of that, they've made billions, and these corporations have made billions. And I don't understand why, because those television stations got the benefit of having the non-public public television stations got advertising dollars. But why they didn't ask for that has always been perplexing to me. So let's get our facts straight, everybody. This is not going to have a huge impact on Big Bird because Big Bird's going to go somewhere else. Big Bird can go elsewhere, particularly if they may have a contract for now, but they can go elsewhere. Jim Henson originally worked for Jimmy Dean, and I got a story on that, but I won't tell it today. But he originally worked for Jimmy Dean. He was willing to give up some rights. We know that because he offered part of his corporation when he got the call to do work for PBS and on the company that was going to do Sesame Street. He offered Jimmy Dean part of his company, and they could have gotten a piece of it, and they didn't. And that's always perplexed me because then they wouldn't need to keep coming back to the government to ask for money. But Big Bird, Ernie, Cookie Monster, none of those are owned by PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or PBS. Now, it was a different world back in 1967. I mean, you had local calls, what today we would call local calls. I mean, today you can call the world pretty much local. But as late as 1993, to call inside of Roanoke County on telephones, you had to pay a toll. In the Virginia House of Delegates, I had to have special phones so people, my constituents, could call me without having to pay a toll, even though I only represented Montgomery County, Roanoke County, and the city of Salem, which is completely surrounded by Roanoke County and the city of Roanoke. And there was toll calls. The world has changed. And it really bothers me that everybody thinks that somehow that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting doesn't have to change with the times. When they were created for the television, we only got 2 channels at my house. We didn't have a big giant TV, and we weren't in the right spot to get ABC. We only got CBS and NBC. So PBS made sense to get some additional broadcasting. Today, everybody has access, some even free over the air, but to hundreds of channels. And so things need to change. And I've said this since the 90s. Now, NPR, the public radio local affiliates, a little bit different. I recognize that. They're a little bit different than the other, and I've long wanted to be helpful and supportive where I could to help them. But unfortunately, they're tied together. And maybe someday there'll be a bill or something that separates them out, and we can get that straightened out a little bit. But I have been confused here today, and maybe things are different in other parts of the country, because they don't do local news. They do regional news, they do state news, and they carry some national news that they get from various sources, but they don't carry local news. My district's 9,000 plus square miles. We've got basically 2 different networks of affiliate national radio programs. They can't do local news in every one of the communities that they're serving, so they do regional and state news. They don't do local news. And that's been talked about today, and I'm just not sure that it's certainly not accurate in my district. I can't speak to others and to what they do, but you know, they're all over the place. And then we get to the emergency broadcast system, as we used to call it. It may be the emergency alert system now, I don't know. But, Mr. Chairman, that's not a part of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's a completely separate agency, is it not, or a separate entity, is it not?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, and so when you talk about the warnings for tornadoes and for storms, I'm not saying they don't carry some of that on the local National Public Radio affiliates, but that's not who you listen to. Because if you're listening to that for half my district, you're listening to what's going on in Roanoke. That's not you. That's not about half my district. You know, up on the in the Appalachian Mountains and on the plateau, it's not them. And likewise, a lot of the programming in deep Southwest comes out of Tennessee. It might be similar in some ways. They might say, hey, watch out in certain counties. I get that. But if you're in my home district, you're paying attention to your local TV station, or you're listening to your local AM, now with an FM transponder that gets it into FM, because they're going to zero in on a specific county. In fact, I got one of my counties where there's a mountain in between. You got one radio station on one side of the mountain and another radio station on the other side of the mountain, and you better be listening, because when the flood is hitting, a specific area like Hayside, you better be on the right radio station, because if you're listening to the other one, they're not going to have any flood at all on that side of the mountain. All the water's on this side of the mountain. And so I've been a little perplexed by this wailing and gnashing of teeth, claiming that somehow we were going to have all these storms that people weren't going to know about, because if we relied on, and I'm not picking on the local affiliates of the public radio, I'm just saying that's not their role in our region. I can't speak for other regions of the country, but I got to believe in large rural districts, it's pretty much the same as mine. That's what I believe. And so I think that doing these rescissions is appropriate. I support it. And I just want to make, if we can have disagreements. That's what we do in Congress. We have disagreements. We fight it out, but let's get the facts right. Corporation for Public Broadcasting is not the emergency broadcast system that we all grew up with, maybe now the emergency alert system. Big Bird is not owned by PBS. Bert and Ernie are not owned by PBS. Jim Henson Productions is a separate entity. It's not owned by the production company for Sesame Street or PBS. And so when you talk about we're going to be kneecapping Big Bird, I submit we might be setting Big Bird free. Big Bird might make more money being set free to go into the private market area whenever their contract is up with PBS and may be able to get more money nationally and internationally when they are set free. But that's a contract negotiation. It has nothing to do with this rescissions bill. And loving Big Bird and Bert and Ernie and loving the story of the original Jim Henson Productions and how they got started on the Jimmy Dean show. He was originally a country music star, for those who don't know, and then took his money and went into sausage. But he didn't take Jim Henson's money because, as I was telling you the other day, Madam Chair, he said to Jim Henson something along the lines of, son, that's your talent. I don't want any of your company. God gave you that talent. Go out and have success. But he got his start, Henson got his start on the Jimmy Dean show.
Madam Chair.
So there's a, oh, by the way, and by the way, Jim Henson's show was not on PBS. I know you're going to be shocked, Madam Chair. Jim Henson's show on which he was, the Jimmy Dean show, was a syndicated show on corporation for-profit television stations that used to run on Saturdays or Sundays, depending on what channel you were watching it on.
I know the chair, I know you're sensitive to the time. I just wanted to flag that. I know that's something you've been concerned about in the past.
All right, I yield back. Gentleman said I talked too long, so I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield? This is about the peanut butter issue that you said, because we're in agreement. That's called RUTF. It is the ready-to-use therapeutic food, and you're right. You do that, and you can save a child's life. But that is all part of the International Disaster Assistance, in which $500 million is being cut. Long, supportive. We're on the same channel, RUTF, which is produced in Georgia with the peanuts, and in Rhode Island at a company called Adhesia, and it is a number of other states. So it is a homegrown American product which is useful in terms of saving youngsters' lives. Thank you, Mr. Long. Thank you very much.
I yielded before that. Yes,
Mr. Norton, you are recognized at last.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Morgan, I wasn't even born when Big Bird was around, so I did eat Jimmy Dean sausage, though. You know,
But Sesame Street is on PBS.
this is going on 3 hours. We got here at 2, and I want to thank both of you for being here. Simon, I noticed you were paying attention. You stayed awake, which was very good. No, I mean, you know, I hope the public that's watching this, this is two different worlds with the Republican Party and what the Democrats stand for now. I've heard criticism after criticism over every little nitpicking thing on the rescissions and on a reconciliation bill. And, you know, I guess it's either, as Morgan said, know the facts. I think this country's got a cancer, and it's called debt, I think, to the tune of $37 trillion. I think that every agency we have, from Social Security to the Highway Trust Fund, Medicaid, Medicare, is running a deficit. And I've heard nothing but criticism. You know, and I look down through the 4 years that the Biden administration, starting with 2021, you add up all the deficits they ran, it's a little over $8 trillion. And, you know, I keep hearing the phrases malnourished children, the health of Americans, the criticism of Elon Musk, who, by the way, I think he donated his services. But where was your voice when you had a chance to speak on the Biden administration? Where were any cuts presented? You said nothing, you did nothing, and you were silent. Where was your voice when the Biden administration let 20-some million people come across this border for over 160 countries? When you had the chance, you said nothing, you did nothing, and you were silent. Where was your voice when the fentanyl deaths that were caused by letting illegals and letting China route the fentanyl into America. Where was your voice then on the children that were starving? You said nothing, you did nothing, and you were silent. Where was your voice when you obviously had a president in Joe Biden who was mentally, let's just
Don't go
say,
there.
compromised?
Don't go there.
And the fact that he could not read a thank you note from
Don't
a.
go there.
I will go there. The time is not yours. You spoke for I don't know how many hours, and you're out of line. Y'all know no order. The you knew nothing. With Joe Biden being incompetent, and the books are being written by the newscasters who aided and abetted it. You risked this country, and you put this country through an administration like Joe Biden, who was incompetent. And when you had a voice to say something, you said nothing, you did nothing, and you were silent. And folks, I hope every rescission that we have, and when you read down through the list, 2 million for sex change surgeries in Guatemala, 520 million to pay consultants to speak people in Africa about China, climate change. I could go on and on. We either get this country right financially, but when y'all had the opportunity, you said nothing, you did nothing, and it was nothing that you would do. It was all words. Are you going to interrupt?
No,
It's not, the time is not yours. No, Miss
Laura.
I like you, Miss.
Mr. Norman, Mr. Norman, wait just a second. Mr. Laura, Mr. Norman is making rhetorical comments. He is not asking you
She
questions.
knows that. She's.
Well, let me clarify, Ms. DeLauro. Let me clarify. Mr. Norman is not asking you a question. When he yields time to you, then you can speak. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, you know better than that. You're too smart. There were no questions to you. And I'm just making a statement because we've been sitting here going on 3 hours. I would just say that the American people, we've got two differences. You got one group, government is your God, you never cut anything, and you just are willing to let this country go into bankruptcy. I am not. And Mr. Idaho, the beauty of what this party has done to come together, yes, it hurts some things in Alabama, as Mr. Neguse was pointing out. It hurts some things in South Carolina. I can't pick and cherry pick the things in South Carolina and ask you in Alabama just to ignore it. No, we're in this boat together, and we're going to sink if we don't all come together. I hope we have a rescission package every week, and 9.4 trillion is minuscule, teardrop in the ocean. But I hope every week we had rescissions. We could cut 5 to 10 trillion and get this country back on frivolous spending that Elon Musk has had the bandwidth to identify. And I will tell you this, he and Donald Trump get criticism. They've done the great things in this country that no one had the courage to do. When the people in the mountains of North Carolina, the government wouldn't do anything. When Biden was getting a photo op in Greenville, South Carolina, which I would never dare to go to, and offer $700, Starlink came at no charge by Elon Musk. When President Trump had the ability to put these things forward and to cure the rampant violence that's happening now in California, which my good friends on the left, there are no consequences for violence and tearing up cities. All that to say is, I admire what, Robert, what your committee did. I admire what we're doing as a party. And America will not be able to provide any help if we don't get our own health back in order. Mr. Idaho, do you have anything to say?
No, let me just say that, again, as I said before, that this rescission package is an important step to getting fiscal responsibility, as you pointed out. I agree with you. I look forward to more rescission packages that go to the root of trying to get out of waste, fraud, and abuse. I think that's what a vast majority of the American people want. That is why Donald Trump was elected in this last election. And I look forward to these rescission package that get to the root of the real problem of waste, fraud, and abuse. And like I said, I'll join you with you in supporting those. And we look forward to seeing those before the House floor.
Well, and 77 million people didn't get it wrong. They see it. They know it. That's why it's astonishing they're keeping that same logic, which is illogical, and the American people are not going to put up with it. So anyway, thank you for what you're doing, and since we're going on to 3 hours, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Seeing no further members to ask questions, this panel is excused. We have two witnesses, I understand, who would like to offer amendments. To the rescission package. Mr. Goldman was here earlier. I don't see him now. Ms. Johnson is here. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's always a treat to come to rules. It's always the interesting part of this business.
Remember, we want you to tell the truth here, Ms.
I
Johnson.
do. I always do, ma'am.
Thank you for being here.
It's a privilege, and thank you all so much for the opportunity. You know, I've just had the privilege of listening to the prior debate, and this rescission package is significant. It addresses many, many areas. I would like to focus on two. I've offered two amendments for this committee. I'll talk about both of them together in my time just to expedite things. The first is PEPFAR. I have an amendment revoking the rescission of PEPFAR and restoring the $400 million in funding. You know, PEPFAR has saved 26 million lives across the world and has helped ensure 8 million babies are born free of HIV. If you care about babies, if you care about life, if you care about families, you must care about PEPFAR. Ending PEPFAR could result in as many as 11 million new HIV infections in just 6 short years. These programs support nearly 48 million women and couples with modern contraceptive care. This funding will have catastrophic impacts on global health. You know, we in this country have the benefit of amazing research, amazing scientists, because this government has funded NIH and has funded critical healthcare research to eradicate and really minimize the devastating impacts of HIV and AIDS. And this is not a disease that is limited to the LGBTQ community. This disease impacts everyone. If you are sexually active, you are at risk of contracting HIV. We've made such progress. And then to have this government, this Congress, turn its back on the millions and millions of dollars that have been spent to get us to this place where HIV and AIDS is controllable, it's manageable, the risk is minimizing, it would be devastating, and that is the wasteful part of this, to turn the back on the progress that we've made when we're so close to coming. So that's my first amendment, would be to restore PEPFAR funding. My second amendment addresses the Corporation of Public Broadcasting and restoring the $1.1 billion stripped from PBS and NPR. You know, we've had debate here today about whether or not PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, is woke. I've heard these comments that it's gotten too progressive in its commentary. So now what's happening is we have no public space. Public broadcasting and the public media is the place for arts. It's the place for non-profitable things to happen. Sometimes we need the Chopin Piano Concerto played. Sometimes we need Masterpiece Theater. We need to spark the creativity. Music and art transcends culture, it transcends language, it transcends race, it transcends generation. It is the soul of our humanity. And the fact that we are taking this away from everyone is irresponsible on the cultural institutions of this country and what communications has founded. You know, we've had, when you're in rural Texas, sometimes the NPR station or the local PBS station is the only radio station out there. It's the only thing that gives commonality, that reaches us to keep people from being isolated. You have states, in my state, we could travel through many of yours before we even get to the one end of the others of mine. And we rely on PBS. We rely on the Corporation of Public Broadcasting to bring generations of programs for our children and for our own humanity. It's a travesty to the cultural progress that this country's made. It's a travesty to our history. It's a tragedy to the children of the future to not have access to PBS Kids, to PBS, and the wonderful characters that have been developed over the history. So I would implore you all to please restore the funding of these two critical programs. It is very vital to the health of our nation, to our role in the world, and it is my strong desire that we see them go forward in a productive and positive way. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Scanlon, do you have any questions?
No, I
Comments?
just thank the member for her testimony, fully support both amendments, and hope they move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Norman, no. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
Just a few points that I wanted to ask about because, you know, I really enjoyed the testimony from Representative Griffin and what's happening in Virginia. And he made a point that Sesame Street is going to be on HBO and Netflix, right? Sounds like Sesame Street might be all right. But one of the points I think is important and why your amendment is key is that working families, they can't afford the $20, the $30, whatever that monthly fee is. Because aren't I correct that Sesame Street is free right now on PBS? You can get it over your TV with an antenna. That can cost you $5 and you never have to pay anything else. Now, PBS is available to 97% of U.S. TV households at no cost, commercial-free, compared to what you'd have to pay. And you know what the key thing is, because even though you represent that big, beautiful city of Dallas, you know Texas, don't you? Because you served in the state legislature. So what do you think about the concept of saying it's all right to make families have to pay when they might not have that money?
Well, the thing is that Sesame Street is, I grew up on Sesame Street. You know, I bet you most folks in this building grew up on Sesame Street, learning how to read, learning to find our favorite characters, learning how to find our way in the world, how to treat our neighbors, how to do so many things to learn how to be good human beings that Sesame Street offers. And it's obviously effective by the fact that it has stood the generations and the decades of time. We have had an election because people can't afford their life. The Republicans campaigned effectively on they're going to lower costs of living for people. But that has not happened. And this is not achieving that campaign promise. In fact, when you are now going to force people to choose between great quality educational content for their kids, or that healthy snack they need in the afternoon, or that new pair of sneakers that are worn out because their feet grew too big, too fast, or whatever the case may be, families are struggling. And there's one thing that we've heard throughout this Congress, in each one of our districts, is that the American people are having a hard time. The cost of living is far outpacing the wages. The cost of goods are going up exponentially. The tariffs are making prices increase. They're not bringing them down. And people are scared, and they're nervous, and they're frustrated. And now what we're doing is to tell that working mom that's got 3 jobs, that's trying to make ends meet that now know you can't have that moment of break and park your kid in front of Sesame Street, a great program that you can feel comfortable to know will help your kid when you go fix dinner because you're exhausted. And now we're taking away that lifeline for so many families across this country at such a nominal amount of our overall budget for what it provides for our young people and their minds and their future is irresponsible to me in this legislation.
Thank you. And I think that's really important, that this is costing American working families more money when they say we're going to cut the Corporation for Public Broadcasting,
That's
the
right.
education funding. That's basically it. And then the other thing is I really want to thank you for highlighting PEPFAR, because the other thing that it provides stability across this planet, and it's talking about the babies. I mean, we need to talk about the babies more in this committee, and so thank you very much for talking about that and the stability and the fact that it also, when you have stability across the country, you don't have as much migration and you don't have as much immigration on the country. And I know we need to
There's no reason a child
move
in this
forward,
world
but
should be
yeah.
born with HIV.
Yeah.
And it is preventable, and we are going to make it to where millions of children are going to have this disease unnecessarily, and it is at the foot of this Congress.
Thank you very much, and with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scanlon?
Madam Chair, I would just ask unanimous consent to insert a statement from Representative Goldman in the record. He was waiting to testify on his amendment to restore the funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but had to leave.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 4? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion of our meeting. Without objection, the committee stands in recess until the conclusion of the 5 p.m. vote series. Yes, ma'am.